It all started on the night of my 18th birthday. My older sister caused a hit and run while driving under the influence, and my parents demanded I take the fall for her. When I flat out refused, they stripped her of any legal consequences, packed my life into a single duffel bag, and kicked me out into the freezing winter rain. Before slamming the door, my father threw a crumpled $200 bill at my face. 15 years later, inside a high society ballroom in Chicago, my mother cornered me, begging me to go to federal prison so I could save her precious, perfect older daughter. But when I heard the real reason behind her desperate pleading, I couldn't help but smile. Before we dive into what happened next, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from today. And if your family ever tried to break you, forcing you to build your own empire from absolute scratch, smash that like button and subscribe. My name is Caroline. I'm 33 years old and a senior partner at a top crisis management PR firm in Chicago. My day job is cleaning up radioactive PR scandals for politicians and corporate executives. Last night, I was attending the annual winter charity auction at the Waldorf Astoria. The ballroom was packed with the city's top financial elite. Sitting at a VIP table near the front, I was quietly checking an email on my phone from my husband Ethan, when a freezing liquid suddenly soaked through the back of my silk gown. The ice-cold shock made me gasp. I stood up fast, just in time to see a crystal champagne glass shatter against the polished marble floor right beside my chair. My mother, Catherine, was standing right behind me. Her face was a twisted mask of terrifying rage and absolute panic, her refined makeup ruined by a grotesque, contorted expression. She slammed a thick legal folder onto my table, knocking over my untouched dinner plate. "Sign this confession right now," she hissed through gritted teeth, her voice carrying a desperate madness I'd never heard from her before. Guests at neighboring tables stopped talking, turning their heads to watch the scene unfold. Unbothered, I picked up a cloth napkin and casually wiped the expensive champagne dripping down my neck. "What on earth are you babbling about, Catherine?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly level to clash with her hysteria. She leaned in close, lowering her voice, so only I could catch the venom. "You are going to sign this paper and admit that you embezzled $2 million from your sister's charitable foundation. You owe her this, Caroline. When you were 18, you refused to take the blame for that little hit and run, and you nearly ruined her life. You owe this family for everything we did for you. We gave you your starting capital when you left, and now it's time to pay us back." I stared at her, genuinely stunned by her level of delusion. The starting capital she was talking about was that crumpled $200 bill my father threw at me before locking the gates. They threw me onto the porch to freeze just because I wouldn't go to jail for a car crash my drunk sister caused. I took that single bill and spent 15 grueling years building a multi-million-dollar PR firm, and now she had the nerve to use that favor to blackmail me. Before I could tell my mother where she could shove those legal documents, Savannah pushed her way through the crowd. My 36-year-old sister looked like the tragic lead in a daytime soap opera. She was wearing a custom designer gown worth a regular person's yearly salary, but her heavy makeup was ruined by fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. Her hands were shaking as she grabbed my arm, digging her acrylic nails deep into my skin. "Caroline, please!" Savannah sobbed, her voice loud enough to ensure the entire room got a show. "You have to do this for me. If Malcolm finds out the money is gone, he'll destroy me. You just do trash PR work anyway. You clean up media garbage for a living. Going to a white-collar federal prison for a couple of years won't ruin your life, but if you don't do this, my marriage is over." I looked at my sister with pure disgust. Malcolm was her husband, an African-American real estate mogul from Atlanta, and the sole heir to a multi-billion-dollar commercial real estate empire. Malcolm was brilliant, hyper-disciplined, and fiercely protective of his family's spotless reputation. For the past 5 years, Savannah had played the role of the flawless, charity-focused high society wife to match his status. And now that mask was slipping off. Savannah tightened her grip on my arm, shaking me slightly. "The auditors are coming tomorrow morning. Caroline, if Malcolm finds out I took money from the foundation, he'll divorce me, he'll leave me with nothing. Mom and Dad already set everything up. They used your old documents to make you the vice president of finance for the foundation. Your name is on the internal filings. On paper, you're already the criminal. Just sign the confessions, so the police take you instead of me. You're my little sister. You're supposed to protect me." I looked from Savannah's pathetic, tear-stained face to my mother's cold, threatening glare. They honestly believed I was still that terrified 18-year-old girl they could manipulate and throw away whenever it suited them. They thought forged documents and public pressure would back me into a corner. They expected me to break down crying or quietly take the fall just to avoid a scene. Without backing down, I locked eyes with Savannah and forced her fingers off my ruined dress, one by one. The background music in the ballroom seemed to fade away as a heavy silence settled over our table. The wealthy donors and socialites surrounding us stared like vultures, waiting for my reaction. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. And I certainly didn't reach for a pen to sign that absurd confession. Instead, I calmly reached into my clutch, pulled out my phone, and sent a brief text to my assistant stationed in the AV control booth upstairs. They thought they had laid a flawless trap for me, but it was nothing compared to what I had ready for them. What happened next would make sure my family never, ever dared to use me as a shield again. I tossed my phone back into my bag as the screen went dark. My mother took my silence for surrender. A cruel, triumphant smile crept across her face, and she leaned over the ruined table toward me. The heavy scent of her expensive perfume mixed with the sour champagne on my dress, making me feel sick. She tapped her manicured nails on the thick legal file. "Did you really think you could just walk away from us, Caroline?" My mother whispered nastily. "You thought you could build your little crisis management firm and just disown your own blood? Your father and I are always one step ahead." 5 years ago, when you foolishly left a box of old tax returns and records in our basement, your father kept them. We knew a selfish girl like you would need to learn a lesson eventually. Savannah stopped her dramatic sobbing. Her fragile, helpless act vanished instantly, replaced by the cold, calculating glare I knew all too well. She smoothed down the front of her gown and crossed her arms. "Don't look at me like that," Savannah spat in a low voice. "I had no choice. Malcolm is auditing the charity accounts tomorrow morning. You know how he is. Malcolm comes from a family of Atlanta real estate billionaires. They built an empire from nothing, and they demand absolute perfection from everyone around them. If he sees $2 million missing, his legal team will tear me apart. They'll leave me with nothing." My mother flipped open the folder, revealing a stack of corporate filings stamped with the official seal of the state of Illinois. "Take a look," Catherine ordered. "Your father used your old records to officially list you as the vice president of finance for Savannah's charity. We submitted these filings 3 years ago. Your social security number, your forged signature, your legal responsibility. Every fraudulent transfer, every single dollar lost leads straight to you. On paper, you're the mastermind who drained the Chudash." I looked down at the documents. I had to admit, the forgery was impressive. My father, William, had always been meticulous when it came to protecting himself. He had copied my signature from an old college application perfectly. They had set this trap years in advance, using me as their ultimate insurance policy in case Savannah's wild spending finally caught up with her. "You have to take the fall for this," Savannah said, leaning across the table until she was just inches from my face. "You're going to sign this confession, stating that you used your position as a crisis consultant to manipulate the charity's funds. You'll tell authorities you acted alone." If you handle this quietly, Malcolm's family will probably just let you do a couple of years in white-collar federal prison instead of making it a huge media storm. But if you try to fight us, we'll hand these documents over to the authorities tonight and tell the press you're a bitter, unhinged sister trying to ruin my marriage." My mother nodded in agreement, crossing her arms. "You owe your sister this sacrifice, Caroline. You owed her 15 years ago when you selflessly refused to take the fall for her accident. We lost so much money keeping Savannah out of trouble back then. Now it's your turn to pay off the family debt. You're just a consultant while Savannah is the wife of a billionaire heir. Her reputation is far more valuable than your freedom." The sheer nerve of their plan was almost impressive. They actually believed they could steal $2 million, frame me for a federal crime, and force me to willingly walk into a prison cell just to protect their lavish lifestyle. They thought my silence meant I was frozen in fear. I calmly grabbed a clean linen napkin from the table. I wiped the last sticky drop of champagne from my collarbone and smoothed out my dress. I didn't feel a single drop of panic. When you spend your entire career handling corporate disasters, you know exactly how to crush amateur blackmailers even if they share your last name. "Are you two finished?" I asked, my voice completely flat and emotionless. Savannah frowned, clearly thrown off by my calm reaction. "Stop acting tough, Caroline. You have nowhere to run. The papers are filed. The money is gone. Malcolm could walk in here any second, and he travels with a security detail. If you don't sign that confession before he steps into this room, I'll start screaming that you attacked me. I'll tell him you stole his money." I tossed the damp napkin onto the table, covering their fake documents completely. "You two made a massive mistake," I said, looking straight into my mother's eyes. "You assumed Malcolm's family built a multi-billion-dollar empire by being gullible. You assumed a man like Malcolm wouldn't notice $2 million disappearing from his wife's pet project. But your absolute biggest mistake was assuming I'm still that helpless 18-year-old girl you threw out on the street." My mother's face turned bright red with anger. She reached for her phone. "I'm calling the police right now," she threatened, her voice rising. "I'm going to tell them my daughter is a thief. Let's see how tough you look in handcuffs." I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that finally made my sister take a step back. "You don't need to call anyone, Catherine," I replied softly. "I've already arranged tonight's entertainment." I glanced up toward the massive AV control booth hanging over the back of the ballroom. I had sent that text to my assistant exactly 2 minutes ago. The countdown was over. The trap they spent 3 years building was about to be obliterated by a reality of my own design. I adjusted my posture and kept my eyes locked on Savannah, waiting for the screens to light up. A loud burst of feedback echoed through the grand ballroom, cutting off the soft classical music. Everyone in the room turned toward the main stage. The giant projection screens, which had been displaying the logo for Savannah's youth education charity, flickered wildly. Instead of the heartwarming promotional video showing underprivileged children, a crystal-clear, high-resolution spreadsheet popped up on the screens. It was a forensic audit report of the foundation's operating accounts. A dead silence fell over the room, followed by a collective gasp from hundreds of wealthy donors. My assistant timed the presentation perfectly. The screen automatically zoomed in on several wire transactions. $300,000 sent to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. $500,000 wired directly to a high roller's VIP suite at a casino in Monaco. $75,000 spent in a single afternoon at an Hermes boutique in Paris. Right next to every shocking expense, Savannah's name, her private offshore account details, and the exact timestamps of the transactions were clearly displayed. The final slide transitioned to an invoice for a private jet to Milan, paid for entirely by the Youth Education Scholarship Fund. Savannah spun around to look at the stage. All the color drained from her face, making her look like a ghost in a designer dress. She let out a sharp, desperate scream. "Turn it off! Cut the power right now!" she shrieked, waving her arms wildly at the stage crew. Her refined socialite persona completely shattered, leaving behind pure, unfiltered panic. Orch. My mother froze in place, her jaw dropping in shock as she stared at the undeniable proof of her perfect eldest daughter's crimes. She tried to step in front of me as if her body could somehow block a giant screen hanging 20 feet in the air. "Caroline, what did you do?" she roared, her voice shaking. "Turn that off, right now. You're ruining your sister." Orch. "I didn't do anything except forward a few interesting files to the AV team," I said smoothly. "You both thought my job was just cleaning up media garbage. You forgot that to handle corporate crises, my firm hires top forensic accountants and cyber investigators. My team needed less than 48 hours to trace that missing $2 million. Savannah didn't even try to hide it. Orch. She just moved the money through a shell company using her own middle name." The whispers in the ballroom quickly turned into chaos. The room was filled with politicians, real estate developers, and major philanthropists. They were watching their generous donations fund my sister's European gambling trips and luxury shopping sprees. Orch. Before anyone could unplug the feed, people were already pulling out their phones, snapping photos of the projected screens. The scandal was out. There was no stopping it now. Savannah gathered her heavy dress and actually tried to run toward the AV control room, screaming for hotel staff to call security on my assistant. Orch. She looked completely unhinged, her heels slipping on the champagne-slicked marble floor. My mother grabbed my shoulder, her nails digging into my skin. "You vicious, ungrateful snake," she spat. "We will destroy you for this. Your father will take every single dime you own." I easily brushed her hand off and picked up my clutch from the table. "Father can't touch me, and neither can you." Orch. "You wanted a scapegoat to save Savannah's marriage, but you should have known better. I stopped taking the fall for this family a long time ago. Enjoy your evening, Catherine. Try the crab cakes. They're fantastic." I turned around, intending to leave the ballroom and let them face the fury of the scammed donors on their own. Orch. I needed to get back to my office and prepare my team for the inevitable media fallout tomorrow morning. But as I walked toward the grand double doors at the back of the hall, the crowd suddenly parted. The chaotic shouting and angry whispers died down, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. I stopped in my tracks. Standing directly in front of the exit was Malcolm. Orch. At 6'3", with a commanding athletic build, dressed in a flawless custom tuxedo, my brother-in-law radiated absolute authority. As the heir to an Atlanta commercial real estate empire, Malcolm naturally intimidated people. Even the most powerful men backed down around him. Tonight, his deep eyes burned, with a cold, controlled fury that sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't alone. Orch. 4 large security guards in black suits stood around him, completely blocking the exit. Nobody was leaving this room tonight. When Savannah saw her husband standing there, she let out a pathetic whimper. She rushed toward him with open arms, ready to play the victim again and spin another web of lies. Orch. She was probably planning to tell him I had hacked the screens and forged the documents out of pure jealousy. But Malcolm didn't even look at his crying wife. He didn't look at my mother, who was rushing over to do damage control either. He simply raised a hand, signaling his security team to step forward and form a physical barrier between him and Savannah. Orch. His intense, unyielding gaze cut right through the chaos caused by his disgraced wife and locked entirely onto me. Malcolm stood like a monument of absolute power. Savannah reached for his arm, her diamond rings flashing under the harsh light of the frozen screen above. She opened her mouth to spout another lie, ready to swear I had fabricated the offshore bank records. Orch. Malcolm just held a single hand. He didn't look at her, nor did he flinch at her crying. He gestured to one of his guards, who quickly walked onto the stage, grabbed a microphone from the podium, and handed it to him. The ballroom grew so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Hundreds of Chicago's elite held their breath. They expected Malcolm to defend his wife's honor. They expected him to unleash his wrath on the woman who had just exposed a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme. He turned his dark, unreadable eyes completely to me. "Caroline," he said, his deep voice amplified through the ballroom speakers. "You have just committed a severe act of corporate espionage. You hacked into a secure financial institution, illegally obtained private banking records, and publicly slandered my wife in a room filled with our most important charitable partners." I looked back at him, my heart maintaining a steady, calculated beat. Behind him, Savannah let out a long sigh of relief. My mother, Catherine, straightened her posture, a smug, arrogant smirk returning to her face. They actually believed Malcolm was buying their story, thinking the billionaire heir was stepping up as their ultimate attack dog. "I will not tolerate anyone attacking my family's reputation," Malcolm continued, his tone icy and precise. "Your little stunt tonight is a direct strike against my family's assets. In the business world, actions like this require immediate compensation. Since you are so skilled at managing PR and corporate structures, I'm going to make you a very simple offer." He snapped his fingers. Another man in a sharp, dark gray suit stepped out from the shadows behind the guards. He was clearly a corporate lawyer, carrying a thick leather portfolio. "You own a lucrative crisis management firm here in Chicago," Malcolm said, projecting his voice so the entire room could witness him passing judgment on me. "I want it. You will transfer 100% ownership, your client list, and your firm's assets to my family's holding company in Atlanta. You will sign the transfer agreement as compensation for the damage you caused my wife tonight. If you agree, I will generously choose not to press charges for this cybercrime. If you refuse, I will use every resource at my disposal to completely erase you." His outrageous demand sparked a wave of shocked whispers among the wealthy guests. He wasn't just defending Savannah. He was trying to swallow up my life's work right out in the open. My mother let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "You heard him, Caroline," she sneered, stepping up to stand beside Malcolm's lawyer. "You played a foolish game and now you've lost everything. Hand over your company. It's your only way to stay out of federal prison. You should have accepted my terms when I offered them earlier. We threw you out on the street 15 years ago, and you survived. You can start over again. Give him the company." I looked at these people who shared my blood. They were almost giddy with excitement. They were watching my hard-earned empire get threatened by a man with unlimited power, and they were loving every second of it. They thought they had finally won. I turned my focus back to Malcolm. He stood motionless, waiting for me to break. "I'm giving you until 8 o'clock tomorrow morning," Malcolm said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet tone that didn't even need the microphone. "If a signed transfer agreement isn't on my desk by 8 o'clock sharp, I will make a few calls. I will freeze your business accounts. I will have my partners cancel every single contract they have with your firm. Before your morning coffee gets cold, you'll be bankrupt. Do we have an understanding, Caroline?" I slowly looked at the giant projection screen, still showing Savannah's shopping sprees in Paris. Then I looked at the armed security guards blocking the exit. Finally, I met Malcolm's eyes. "I understand completely what kind of man you are, Malcolm," I said, my voice steady enough to cut through the heavy silence of the ballroom. "I understand you think money can buy submission, but my company is not for sale, and it will definitely not be used to pay off your wife's gambling debts." I took a step forward, walking straight toward the wall of security guards. My mother gasped, clearly expecting the men in black suits to tackle me to the marble floor. I stopped just inches from Malcolm. We were so close, I could see the subtle clenching of his jaw. "You only have until 8 tomorrow morning," he repeated softly. I smiled. It was a cold, unapologetic smile. "Have a wonderful night, Malcolm. Try to keep an eye on your wallet." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked straight through the gap in the security team. They stepped aside slightly to let me pass, their eyes darting to Malcolm for instructions, but he gave none. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the ballroom and stepped out into the cool Chicago night air. Porch. I didn't sleep that night. I went straight to my downtown office. My husband, Ethan, was already waiting for me. As a former federal prosecutor, Ethan understood the legal machinery of financial warfare better than anyone. We spent the entire night preparing for the inevitable strike. I briefed my core team, secured our sensitive data, and braced for the wrath of a billionaire. Porch. The sun rose over Lake Michigan, casting a bright, cold light through my floor-to-ceiling office windows. Ethan stood by my desk holding 2 cups of black coffee. He checked his watch. "It's 7:59, Ethan said quietly. We stared at the digital clock on my computer monitor. The second hand ticked away in agonizingly slow motion. Malcolm had promised to destroy me. Porch. My parents were likely sitting in their luxury hotel suite right now, toasting to my downfall, eagerly waiting for my life to collapse. The clock struck 8. Nothing happened immediately. Then, at exactly 8:01, my desk phone rang. It was my chief accountant, her voice trembling. "Caroline," she said, sounding utterly panicked. "I just tried to process the weekly payroll batch transfer. Porch. All of our corporate credit cards were declined. The bank says our operating accounts have been completely frozen pending a third-party judicial review." I hung up the phone. Ethan looked at me, his jaw set in a hard line. Malcolm wasn't bluffing. He pulled the trigger. My accounts were frozen and my business was paralyzed. Porch. When I placed the receiver back on the cradle, it felt ridiculously heavy. Ethan didn't need me to repeat what the chief accountant had said. My husband could read the harsh reality settling over us right off my face. Malcolm had actually done it. He mobilized his family's massive financial infrastructure to paralyze my PR firm in seconds. Porch. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the Chicago skyline. Morning traffic was just beginning to build. The streets packed with people completely unaware of the corporate execution happening inside my office walls. Ethan immediately opened his laptop and began typing at rapid speed. Bypassing our frozen internal network, he accessed public commercial court filings. Porch. Malcolm didn't just freeze the accounts, Ethan said, his eyes scanning dense legal text. He filed for an emergency ex parte injunction at dawn. His lawyers used Savannah's Charity Foundation as the plaintiff, claiming you transferred the missing $2 million directly into your firm's operating funds, effectively turning your entire business into a crime scene. Porch. It's a complete fabrication, but it's enough to make a judge lock down your accounts during a federal investigation. My desk phone rang again. Then my personal cell phone screen lit up. Through the glass office doors, I could see the main work area devolving into chaos. Porch. Dozens of my employees were staring at their computer monitors in confusion, bright red error messages flashing on their screens as they were locked out of the vendor payment system. I took a deep breath, forcing down the pain of being betrayed by my own family. I was a crisis management expert. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. Porch. I stepped out of my private executive suite and stood at the top of the short staircase overlooking the main workspace. The anxious murmurs died down instantly as my team looked up at me. "Listen to me carefully." I raised my voice, making sure it reached every corner of the room. "We are currently under a targeted financial attack by a hostile third party. Porch. Our operating accounts are temporarily locked. Do not panic. Nobody is losing their job, and your paychecks are backed by a completely separate trust fund. I want all non-essential external communication stopped immediately. Draft a statement citing an internal software migration to explain any delays in vendor payments. Keep your heads down and keep working." Porch. They nodded in unison, grounded by the absolute authority in my voice. I returned to my office and closed the glass door firmly behind me. Ethan was already on his cell phone, pacing the room with a dangerous energy. The bleeding was just beginning. Ouch. My personal phone buzzed with a text from a major client, a prominent state senator, who relied heavily on campaign funding from commercial real estate developers. The message was brief and cowardly. "Caroline, I'm so sorry, but I have to cancel my retainer agreement." Malcolm made a call. In less than 20 minutes, 3 of my largest corporate clients officially terminated their contracts. Ouch. The second cancellation came via email from the CEO of a massive logistics firm whose distribution warehouses were owned entirely by Malcolm's family trust in Georgia. The third came as a brutal phone call from a national retail chain with heavy investments in Malcolm's commercial plazas. It was a masterfully executed corporate execution. Ouch. Malcolm was flexing his billionaire leverage, systematically severing my firm's revenue streams. He wanted me to watch my life's work burn to ashes before lunchtime. Ethan ended his call and rubbed the back of his neck. "I just spoke with a judge I used to work with when I was a prosecutor. Malcolm's legal team is ruthless. Ouch. They've basically thrown a heavy blanket over your entire financial lifeline. We can fight the injunction, but getting it lifted will take at least 48 hours. Malcolm knows that. He's trying to suffocate you into handing over the company before we even get a hearing." "He wants to bleed me dry," I replied, staring at the growing list of canceled contracts on my monitor. Ouch. 15 years ago, my parents threw me into the freezing winter. Now they're trying to freeze me out of this industry just to protect Savannah. "I will never let them win," Ethan said, stepping behind my desk to stand firmly beside me. "I have emergency funds in my personal account. If needed, we can cover operations and pay your core team out of pocket for a month." Ouch. They abandoned you at 18, handed you a $200 bill, and told you that you were worthless. Now they're trying to steal what you built. We just need to keep the media from finding out what happened at the charity gala last night. If the press catches wind of your sister framing you for embezzling $2 million, your remaining clients will run for the hills by noon. Ouch. I knew he was completely right. In the fast-paced PR world, public perception was everything. If the market saw me as a criminal, my firm would be worthless by sunset. We needed to push a counter-narrative, launch a major news distraction to draw the financial press away, while Ethan used legal channels to unfreeze my accounts. Ouch. I sat down at my keyboard and began drafting a press release, preparing to leak an anonymous tip to a friendly journalist regarding Savannah's offshore gambling habits. I needed to shift the spotlight back onto my perfect sister before she could finish framing me. Just as I clicked save on the document, a sharp metallic chime echoed through my office suite. Ethan and I both froze. Ouch. The sound came from the private executive elevator. The only people with access to that specific elevator code were me, Ethan, and my building's property manager. The heavy steel doors slid open with a soft hum. Stepping onto the plush carpet of my private reception area was my father, William. Dressed in a tailored suit, he wore a sickeningly arrogant smirk. Ouch. He didn't look like a man whose daughter had just been exposed for massive financial fraud. He looked like a conqueror arriving to claim his final prize. Clutched tightly under his right arm was a thick, hard-shell legal binder. He wasn't alone. Following right behind him was a slick, expensive-looking corporate lawyer I didn't recognize. Ouch. My father strolled into my office like he owned the entire building. "Good morning, Carolyn," my father said, his voice dripping with fake affection. "The view from up here really is magnificent. It's a shame you won't be enjoying it much longer." I stood behind my desk, my posture rigid. I stared at the man who shared half my DNA, looking absolutely insufferable. Ouch. The lawyer with him was a man in his late 50s, wearing an expensive but poorly fitted suit. He radiated the ruthless vibe of a corporate predator, the kind who made a living bullying small business owners into submission. My father slammed the heavy legal binder onto my glass desk. The loud thud echoed in the quiet suite. Ouch. He tapped the leather cover with his index finger, puffing out his chest proudly. "What is this, William?" I asked, intentionally using his first name. I had stopped calling him Dad a decade ago. "This is an equity injection agreement," my father smoothly replied. He walked over to my private bar, picked up a crystal tumbler, and casually poured himself a glass of sparkling water. "It is a legally binding document confirming the seed capital I provided for you to start this little PR firm." I stared at him, genuinely wondering if he had lost his mind. "You never gave me a single penny to start this company," I said, my voice dangerously low. "I built this firm from nothing. I worked 3 jobs, I went hungry, and I took out commercial loans that I paid off myself. You have zero financial connection to my business." My father took a sip of water and chuckled. "That's where you're mistaken, Caroline. 15 years ago, when you stubbornly decided to walk out on our family, I handed you $200. That was your initial seed capital. You used my money to pay for your first few nights at a motel, which kept you alive long enough to find a job and eventually start this business. In the eyes of the law, that makes me your primary angel investor." The sheer level of his delusional nerve left me speechless. He was referring to the night he and my mother threw me out into a freezing rainstorm. I was 18, and I had just refused to take the fall for Savannah's drunk driving hit and run. To protect their precious favorite child from jail, my parents stuffed my clothes into trash bags, shoved a crumpled $200 bill into my hand, and locked the door. I spent that night sleeping on a plastic chair at a bus station because $200 couldn't even rent a safe hotel room in that neighborhood. And now, 15 years later, he was standing in my multi-million-dollar office, looking out over the Chicago skyline, claiming that traumatic eviction was a corporate investment. The slick lawyer stepped forward and opened the binder, revealing a stack of freshly printed documents. "My client is asserting a 50% equity stake in your agency based on the doctrine of foundational investment." The lawyer chimed in, his voice smooth and condescending. "Given that you were an 18-year-old dependent who used his funds to establish your financial independence, we have filed retroactive paperwork claiming co-ownership of this PR firm." "That is not how the law works," I said, leaning forward and pressing my hands onto the desk. "Any judge in Illinois would laugh you out of court for trying to claim a $200 eviction handout translates to a 50% stake in an 8-figure enterprise." "Perhaps," the lawyer sneered with an oily smile. "But corporate litigation takes years. Right now, your operating accounts are frozen by a third-party injunction. You lack the liquid capital to fight a drawn-out ownership dispute in civil court, meaning my client's claim serves as immediate leverage." My father set his glass down on my desk, leaving a ring of condensation on the glass surface. "You see, Caroline, we've resolved our family crisis. You were extremely disrespectful at the gala last night, so I took matters into my own hands. I proved to Malcolm that I'm a man who handles his business." "What did you do?" I narrowed my eyes, staring at his smug expression. "I went to Malcolm's hotel penthouse suite this morning," William announced proudly. "I showed him this equity injection agreement. I proved to him that I own half your company. Since Savannah's charity foundation is currently short $2 million, I did my duty as an honorable father. I signed over my 50% stake in your agency to Malcolm's real estate holding company, completely settling your sister's debt." My father leaned across my desk, his face just inches from mine, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. "Malcolm accepted the deal. Savannah is completely off the hook. Her marriage to a billionaire is saved, and her reputation remains spotless. And you, Caroline, no longer hold a controlling interest in this firm. Malcolm's corporate transition team will be here before noon to begin the takeover." I looked down at the forged, absurd legal documents on my desk. My parents had actually used a fake investment claim to sell off a company they didn't own, all to pay back the money my sister stole to buy designer bags in Monaco. and they genuinely thought this twisted, illegal scheme was brilliant. Orch. You need to start packing your personal belongings into a cardboard box, my father ordered, his voice dropping into the stern, authoritarian tone he used when he kicked me out 15 years ago. I'm evicting you again, Caroline. But this time, you don't even get to keep the $200. He stepped back, crossing his arms, waiting for my spirit to break. Orch. He was anticipating the inevitable panic, expecting me to drop to my knees, beg him to stop and plead for my life's work. I didn't break. I simply shifted my gaze right past his shoulder. Through that entire bitter exchange, my husband, Ethan, had been standing quietly in the shadows of my office corner. Orch. My father and his slick attorney, blinded by their own arrogance, had completely ignored his presence. Ethan stepped out from the morning light. Wearing a dark, impeccably tailored suit, his expression carried zero mercy. Without saying a word to my father, he walked with a measured, deliberate pace toward the heavy glass doors of my executive suite. Orch. He grabbed the stainless steel handle, pulled the door shut, and turned the heavy deadbolt. A loud, solid click echoed through the quiet room. My father frowned, turning to look at Ethan. What do you think you're doing? Open that door. We're finished here. Ethan ignored him entirely. Reaching into his suit jacket, he pulled out his phone and pressed a speed dial button. Orch. Placing it to his ear, his cold, calculating gaze locked onto the corporate attorney, whose greasy smile instantly began to vanish. Ethan lowered his phone and slid it back into his custom jacket. Still, he didn't utter a single word to my father or the rogue lawyer. Instead, my husband just smiled. Orch. It was the same cold, predatory smile he had worn throughout his career, every time he sent arrogant white-collar criminals to prison. Ethan turned back, grabbed the heavy handle of my office door, and unlocked the bolt. He swung the glass door wide open. Standing straight in the center of my reception area were two men dressed in dark, conservative suits. Orch. They didn't look like private security, and they certainly didn't look like corporate executives. They carried a rigid, undeniable authority that instantly shifted the air pressure in the room. As the two men walked past the reception desk and straight into my private suite, the chatter from my PR staff in the open bullpen completely died down. Orch. William frowned, puffing out his chest to maintain his illusion of control. He pointed an accusing finger at my husband. What kind of intimidation tactic is this, Ethan? My father demanded. Are these your private bodyguards? Because let me remind you, I own 50% of this firm now. I can have you thrown off the premises for trespassing. Ethan let out a soft chuckle. Orch. He stepped aside, allowing the two men to fully enter the office. William, Ethan began, his voice level and dangerously quiet. I'd like you to meet Agent Bennett and Agent Foster. They're with the FBI Chicago field office, and they aren't here for me. All the blood drained from my father's face. Orch. The smug, triumphant sneer he had been wearing just moments ago vanished, replaced by a sudden creeping terror. Beside him, the corporate attorney froze. His eyes darted nervously from the thick binder on my desk to the two federal agents. As a lawyer, he understood the gravity of the situation much faster than my father did. Orch. Ethan stepped forward with the practiced precision of a seasoned federal prosecutor delivering an opening statement. Let me break down exactly what you two geniuses accomplished this morning, Ethan said, looking straight at the sweating attorney. You fabricated an equity agreement based on a $200 cash eviction from 15 years ago. Orch. Then, using that fraudulent foundation, you forged my wife's signature, claiming to transfer 50% of a multi-million-dollar corporate entity to a third-party holding firm. The attorney swallowed hard, taking a slow, involuntary step away from my father. In a local civil court, that might have been treated as standard fraud. Orch. But Ethan's voice cut through the silence, shattering his illusion. Where you made your fatal error was taking those forged documents and actively negotiating an asset transfer with Malcolm's holding company, based out of Atlanta, Georgia. Orch. by transmitting fraudulent financial documents across state lines to settle Savannah's $2 million embezzlement debt, you triggered federal jurisdiction. Agent Bennett unbuttoned his suit jacket, resting his hand near his belt. You have committed federal wire fraud, conspiracy, and interstate commerce violations, the agent announced firmly. Torch. Each of those charges carries up to 20 years in federal prison. The corporate attorney completely unraveled, his professional arrogance shattered into a million pieces. Realizing his entire career, his law license, and his freedom were evaporating, right before his eyes, he threw his hands up in panic and backed away until his shoulders hit my office wall. Torch. I was misled, the lawyer stammered, his voice cracking with panic. My client assured me the investment narrative was legally sound. He told me he had proof of the initial capital. I had no idea these documents were completely fabricated. I will fully cooperate with federal authorities. I forged nothing. You spineless coward, my father yelled, turning his rage onto his own legal counsel. Torch. You told me this strategy was foolproof. You said Malcolm would accept the transfer, and the courts would be too tied up to stop it. The attorney didn't even look at my father. He bolted toward the door, desperate to escape the suite and create distance from the crime scene. Agent Foster stepped forward casually, blocking the doorway with his broad frame and sealing the exit. Torch. The lawyer shrank back, dripping sweat, realizing there was no way out of the trap they had walked into. My father was gasping, his hands starting to shake violently. The reality of a federal indictment crashed down on him, crushing his grandiose delusions. He turned to me, his eyes wide and pleading. Torch. He expected the obedient, terrified daughter he had bullied for 18 years to miraculously reappear and save him. Caroline, my father begged, his voice dropping an octave, as he desperately tried to play the family card. Caroline, you have to tell them to stop. Tell your husband to have his friends step down. This is a family matter. We can negotiate privately. I'm your father. Torch. You can't let them send me to federal prison. I stared at the man who had used my basic survival as a stepping stool his entire life for Savannah's happiness. I looked at the man who had walked into my office this morning fully intending to steal my life's work and throw me onto the street a second time. I don't negotiate with criminals, I replied, my voice icy cold. Torch. And a real father doesn't throw his teenage daughter into a freezing rainstorm to protect a drunk driver. You made your choice 15 years ago, William. Today is simply the consequence. Agent Bennett stepped forward. He reached behind his belt and pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. In the tense silence of the room, the metallic clicking sound was deafening. Torch. William cringed against my private bar as the federal agent approached. Hands behind your back, sir, Agent Bennett commanded. My father raised his trembling hands, preparing to surrender to authorities. His reign of manipulation was finally over. But just as the cold steel was about to snap around his wrists, a sharp, piercing ringtone shattered the quiet in the room. It was my father's phone. Torch. William flinched, looking down at his jacket pocket before glancing up at the federal agents, silently begging for permission to answer. Agent Bennett nodded, gesturing for him to pull it out slowly. My father's trembling fingers pulled the phone from his pocket. Seeing the caller ID, he swiped to answer. Torch. Because his hands were shaking so violently, he accidentally hit the speakerphone button instead of bringing the device to his ear. Savannah's voice instantly exploded through the quiet office. But she was no longer playing the calm, refined billionaire's wife. She was screaming in absolute hysterical terror. Torch. Dad, help me! Savannah shrieked through the speaker, accompanied by the piercing blare of an ambulance siren. Dad, something went wrong! I'm bleeding. They're rushing me to the emergency room right now. You have to find Malcolm. He's going to destroy me! The federal agents paused, exchanging a sharp look. Torch. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes narrowing, as he listened to my sister's frantic, terrified sobbing echo through my executive suite. Savannah continued to cry hysterically over the speaker, her shrill voice bouncing off the glass walls. George. She sobbed that doctors were rushing her on a gurney, claiming the severe stress from this morning had caused terrible abdominal cramping, and that she was terrified of losing her baby. My father gripped the phone with white knuckles. He looked up at Agent Bennett, his previous arrogance entirely replaced by a desperate, frantic terror. "You can't arrest me," William pleaded, his voice breaking. "George, did you hear that? My daughter is pregnant. She's in the ER right now. If you put handcuffs on me and it hits the news, the shock will destroy my unborn grandchild. You have to let me go to the hospital." Agent Bennett and Agent Foster exchanged a hard, tactical glance. As federal investigators, they were well accustomed to suspects fabricating sudden medical emergencies to dodge custody. But before the agents could order my father to lower the phone, the heavy glass door to my office swung open once again. Stepping into the room was a team of 3 men in impeccably sharp suits, moving with the synchronized, aggressive precision of an elite corporate strike team. I recognized the man in the lead. He was the head of litigation for Malcolm's family empire, a ruthless legal shark operating out of Atlanta. He must have been waiting in my building's lobby to finalize the hostile takeover of my PR firm, only to spring into action the moment he heard about Savannah's sudden medical crisis. The lead attorney walked straight between my father and the federal agents. Without introducing himself, he raised a single hand, physically blocking Agent Bennett's approach. "I am the senior executive counsel for the family trust," the lawyer announced, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Gentlemen, you are attempting to detain my client's father-in-law without a formal grand jury indictment. You are doing so based on an alleged forged document in an ongoing corporate dispute. And you are doing all of this while his daughter, the wife of a prominent billionaire and the mother of his unborn heir, is undergoing a severe, high-risk medical emergency." The lawyer stepped closer to the agents, dropping his voice to a dangerous, threatening register. "If you put handcuffs on this man today, and the resulting media storm causes my client's wife to lose her pregnancy, I will personally ensure the resulting civil liability lawsuit bankrupts the federal government. I will tie your field office up in endless litigation. You will be held personally accountable for the loss of a third-generation heir to a multi-billion-dollar estate. Do we understand each other?" The air in the office grew impossibly heavy. The threat was far more than just posture. The financial leverage and political connections owned by Malcolm's family were more than enough to derail everyone's career in the room. They could bury the FBI field office in red tape and public outcry to the point where the wire fraud case would be shelved indefinitely. I looked at Ethan. My husband's jaw was tight, the muscle in his cheek twitching slightly. As a former federal prosecutor, Ethan knew exactly how the game was played at this level of wealth. A federal prosecution required an absolute airtight case. If the agents arrested William right now, Malcolm's high-powered legal team would immediately file a barrage of injunctions, claiming federal harassment caused medical trauma. They would turn William into the victim. Ethan gave Agent Bennett a nearly imperceptible nod, a silent communication between men who understood the machinery of the law. They needed to secure grand jury subpoenas first. They needed to lock down the paper trail completely before they could bypass Malcolm's billion-dollar legal shield. Agent Bennett slowly took a step back, lowering his hand from the handcuffs at his belt. He looked straight at the lead attorney, refusing to be intimidated. "We are stepping out," Agent Bennett said coldly. "But you can inform your client that this investigation remains fully active. The fraudulent documents remain in federal custody. We will be back. Next time, no amount of corporate lawyers will stand between him and a warrant." The 2 agents turned and walked out of my office, their heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. The moment the glass door closed behind them, my father let out a long, shaky breath. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. The crippling fear that had paralyzed him just moments ago quickly evaporated, replaced once again by a sickening, victorious sneer. He looked at me, a dark satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. "Orch. You really thought you had me, didn't you, Caroline?" My father sneered, adjusting his suit jacket. "You thought you could send your own father to federal prison, but you always underestimate Savannah. She always wins. She has the ultimate armor now. She's carrying a billionaire's child. To a family like ours, you're nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Enjoy your empty office." Orch. He turned and walked out, flanked by Malcolm's legal team, leaving Ethan and me standing alone in the quiet suite. I walked over to my desk and sank into my leather chair, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Savannah was pregnant. That completely reshaped the battlefield. She was no longer just a reckless, embezzling socialite. Orch. She had successfully established herself as the mother of Malcolm's heir, anchoring herself to his family's wealth and protection in the most permanent way possible. Ethan came over, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We have the evidence, Caroline. The wire fraud is real. Malcolm's lawyers can only delay the FBI for so long. Orch. Once we trace the rest of those missing charity funds, we'll bring them all down." Before I could answer, my phone vibrated violently against the glass surface of my desk. Then it buzzed again and again in rapid succession. Suddenly, a relentless stream of notifications began flooding my screen. Orch. These weren't client emails or employee updates. They were social media alerts pouring in by the hundreds every second. I unlocked my phone and opened the trending page. My blood ran completely cold. Savannah hadn't wasted a single second. Lying in her ER bed, she had recorded a live video stream and broadcasted it to her millions of followers. Orch. I stared at the screen, watching my sister deliver the performance of her life. She was leaning against crisp, white hospital pillows, looking pale, fragile, and utterly terrified. Protective hands were cradled over her stomach as tears streamed down her flawless face. "I didn't want to bring this public," Savannah sobbed into the camera, her voice trembling with staged trauma. "Orch. But I am so scared for my baby. My estranged sister Caroline is a very dark, very bitter person. She has hated me her entire life. Today she orchestrated a fake federal raid on our elderly father just to intimidate my family. The stress was so severe I almost lost my baby. She's trying to destroy my life because she's filled with bitterness and cruelty. Orch. Please, I just want my baby to be safe from her." The video ended. Below the post, engagement numbers were climbing at an astronomical rate. Millions of views, hundreds of thousands of shares. I quickly scrolled through the comments. It was an absolute execution by Digital Firing Squad. Thousands of strangers were demanding a complete boycott of my firm. Orch. People were posting my office address online, calling me a monster, a psychopath, and a bitter loser who deserved to be locked away for terrorizing a pregnant woman. The internet had directed its collective, uncontrolled rage entirely at me. Savannah had just launched a nuclear strike on my public reputation, using her unborn child as the ultimate shield. Orch. The digital destruction of my reputation didn't stay confined to social media for long. By 7 o'clock the next morning, my mother and sister had escalated their coordinated attack to national television. Ethan and I stood in my suite, watching the large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. Orch. The morning talk show host was leaning forward in her plush armchair, her face draped in exaggerated sympathy. Sitting across from her were Catherine and Savannah. My sister was wearing a soft, light blue maternity dress that perfectly framed her supposedly fragile frame. Looking completely exhausted, she gripped my mother's hand as if she might collapse at any second. Orch. We tried everything to help Caroline, my mother told the national audience, dabbing away a perfectly timed tear. When she was 18, she fell in with a terrible crowd. She struggled with severe substance abuse. We spent our life savings trying to get her into rehab, but she chose to live on the streets and turn her back on the family. We had to practice tough love. Orch. Now that she's back in our lives, she's trying to blackmail us. She's deeply jealous of Savannah's success and her beautiful marriage. Savannah sniffled, touching her stomach with trembling fingers. Yesterday was terrifying, she whispered to the camera. Caroline sent armed men to my father's office. She wanted money. Torch. When I tried to intervene, the stress was so overwhelming that I was rushed to the emergency room. I'm carrying the first heir to my husband's family, and my own sister wanted to intimidate me into a miscarriage. I just want her to stay away from my baby. I muted the TV. The sick creativity of their lies was almost impressive. Torch. They had weaponized my survival of the eviction, twisting it into a fictional battle with addiction. They framed Savannah as a helpless pregnant victim and painted me as an unhinged blackmailer. Outside my glass office doors, the fallout was immediate. My firm's phone system lit up in a solid wall of blinking red lights, every line ringing simultaneously. Torch. My receptionist was practically in tears, and the email server was flooded with abuse. Opening my inbox, I found hundreds of death threats pouring in every minute, with strangers sending vivid descriptions of how they wanted to punish me for being a monster who targeted a pregnant woman. Someone had already leaked my home address online. Torch. Ethan's fist slammed down onto my conference table, the loud thud vibrating the glass. We end this right now, he said, his voice laced with protective fury. I'm calling my contact at the Wall Street Journal. We give them the Monaco casino receipts, the offshore transfers, and the forged state filings. Torch. I'll have the FBI release a statement confirming William is under an active federal investigation for wire fraud. We can bury their TV interview before noon. I looked at my husband. His protective instincts as a former federal prosecutor were roaring. He wanted to deliver a knockout blow using indisputable, empirical evidence of their financial crimes. Torch. In a court of law, his strategy would be flawless. But we weren't in a court of law. We were in the court of public opinion, and that was my arena. No, I said softly, walking over to my desk and opening my encrypted laptop. If I drop financial documents right now, it will completely backfire. Ethan looked at me in disbelief. Caroline, they are destroying your life on national television. Torch. Your remaining clients will terminate their contracts before the end of the day, just to avoid the public backlash. We have proof Savannah stole $2 million. Why are we holding back? Because she's pregnant, I answered, looking him straight in the eye. In the eyes of the public, a pregnant woman is sacred. Torch. If I release a complex financial spreadsheet showing offshore bank accounts, the media won't care. They'll frame it as a bitter, jealous sister, trying to divert attention from terrorizing an expectant mother. The public will say I fabricated the financial documents out of spite. Savannah anchored herself to Malcolm's billionaire legacy. And that child is her ultimate armor. Torch. If we want to destroy her narrative, we can't attack the money right now. We have to shatter the armor. Ethan crossed his arms, his legal mind quickly adapting to my PR strategy. So how do we break the armor? I sat down in my leather chair, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Savannah is a narcissist, I explained. Torch. And narcissists are notoriously careless when they think they've already won. She staged this pregnancy narrative perfectly, but she rushed it yesterday when the FBI closed in on William. She panicked, and when people panic, they leave digital footprints. Torch. I pulled up my proprietary crisis management database, a restricted software network my firm used to run deep background checks on corporate competitors and hostile whistleblowers. It bypassed standard search engines connecting directly to property records, medical licensing boards, and private aviation manifests. Savannah claimed she was rushed to the ER yesterday, I said, scanning the screen. Torch. But when she was screaming at my father over speakerphone, the sirens in the background sounded distorted. It sounded like a stock audio file, not an actual ambulance. Furthermore, Malcolm's legal team showed up at my office less than 20 minutes later. For a sudden medical crisis, they were far too coordinated and prepared. Torch. I pulled up the high-definition video clip Savannah had posted to social media from her hospital bed. Maximizing the video on my monitor, I paused on the exact frame where she adjusted her position, zooming in on the crisp white pillowcase behind her head. "Look at the emblem embroidered on the edge of the pillow," I pointed to the screen. "Orch. That's not the logo for Northwestern Memorial or any major trauma center in Chicago. That's the logo for the Elysian Wellness Institute, an exclusive private boutique clinic in the Gold Coast neighborhood that specializes in discreet cosmetic procedures and fertility treatments. They don't even have an active emergency room for pregnancy trauma." Orch. Ethan leaned over my shoulder, staring at the paused video. Why would she fake a life-threatening emergency at a boutique clinic instead of going to a real hospital? Because a real hospital requires real blood tests, fetal heart monitors, and attending physicians who can't be bribed, I said, a cold realization settling in my chest. Orch. Savannah didn't go to a hospital yesterday because she couldn't risk a random ER doctor examining her. I quickly cross-referenced the ownership records for the Elysian Wellness Institute. The property holding firm that owned the clinic building was a shell subsidiary registered in Atlanta, tied directly to the commercial real estate portfolio of Malcolm's Family Trust. Orch. I began typing rapidly, running a backdoor search on the chief medical officer of the clinic. The results popped up on my screen, revealing a highly confidential network of offshore transactions. Savannah wasn't just using the clinic to film her fake video. Orch. Over the past 4 months, she had been routing a portion of the stolen charity funds directly into the private accounts of the clinic's medical director. Ethan stared at the screen, his breath catching slightly. "She's paying off the doctor." I looked up at my husband, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Orch. "Savannah isn't just faking the timeline of this pregnancy," I whispered, my heart racing from the weight of the discovery. "She's faking the bloodline. We just found the key to destroying her entire empire." I stared at the glowing monitor, the blue light reflecting in Ethan's eyes as he leaned over my desk. Savannah wasn't just using the charity funds to buy designer bags in Paris. Orch. She had injected hundreds of thousands of dollars directly into the private offshore account of the chief medical officer at the Elysian Wellness Institute. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Orch. In the high-stakes world of crisis PR, you learn very quickly that the wealthy elite use boutique private clinics for only 2 things: to cover up illegal addiction issues, or to hide destructive secrets about their genetics. Outside my glass office doors, the fallout from my mother and sister's national TV interview was reaching a fever pitch. Orch. My firm's phone lines were glowing a solid, blinding red, with my receptionist fielding death threats from strangers who genuinely believed I was a drug-addicted monster harassing a pregnant woman. The pressure to immediately release financial documents and clear my name was immense, but I blocked out the noise entirely. Orch. I needed the final piece of the puzzle to ensure Savannah could never recover from the blow I was preparing. Ethan pulled up a chair beside me, his law enforcement background kicking into high gear. "Trace the routing numbers on those clinic payments," he instructed, his voice tight with focused anticipation. Orch. If Savannah is paying a prominent physician off the books, there has to be a secondary ledger. No medical professional risks their license to launder money without keeping a heavily protected insurance file. Orch. Routing the search through my firm's encrypted server, I bypassed standard financial firewalls using specialized tracking software normally reserved for exposing aggressive corporate espionage. The digital paper trail quickly led us away from the Youth Charity Foundation and straight into an intricate labyrinth of offshore holding companies registered in the Cayman Islands. Orch. Savannah had created a primary shell company to receive the stolen funds, thinking she was brilliant for burying the accounts under a series of anonymous corporate layers. But narcissists always leave fingerprints. Orch. She had used the name of her beloved childhood horse, as the security question for the password recovery protocol. A detail I remembered vividly, because the year my parents bought her that thoroughbred was the same year they told me they couldn't afford my high school textbooks. Cracking the master ledger of the holding company, a dizzying matrix of transaction numbers flooded my screen. Orch. Ethan let out a sharp, heavy breath. The account balance showed far more than the $2 million she had drained from the charity. The total assets in her hidden offshore account sat at over $17 million. Where did the rest of this money come from? I asked, my eyes scanning the massive deposits. Orch. I highlighted a recurring wire transfer that hit the offshore account on the 1st of every month for the past 3 years. Ethan leaned closer to the monitor, cross-referencing the routing numbers with a commercial banking database on his own phone. His jaw dropped. Caroline, he said, his voice low and raspy with disbelief. Those wire transfers originated in Atlanta. Orch. They came directly out of the primary commercial real estate holding trust owned by Malcolm's family. Savannah hadn't just been stealing from her little charity foundation. She had been continuously draining her husband's generational wealth to the tune of $15 million. The sheer scale of her crime was staggering. Orch. Posing as the perfect devoted high society wife, Savannah had been executing a quiet, ongoing heist right under the nose of an intensely authoritative man. But the massive theft immediately raised a glaring question. Why was she funneling so much stolen money into a boutique fertility clinic in Chicago instead of simply hoarding it offshore? Orch. I needed access to the private medical logs of the Elysian Wellness Institute without triggering cybersecurity alarms. Picking up my phone, I called a contact I had cultivated in the media industry over a decade. A highly specialized investigative journalist. 3 years ago, I had saved his career by shielding his news network from a catastrophic defamation suit, and he owed me a massive favor. Without revealing the full context, I told him I needed the blind billing architecture for the clinic's VIP client roster. Less than 20 minutes later, a heavily encrypted data file landed in my secure inbox. My hands were actually trembling as I typed in the decryption key. Unzipping the file, it revealed Savannah's private itemized medical invoices at the clinic over the past 12 months. Bypassing standard cosmetic procedures, I looked directly for the reproductive department billing codes. A series of highly specialized, incredibly expensive fertility treatments appeared on screen. Ethan pressed his hands flat on my desk, his eyes narrowing as he read the clinical descriptions. Orch. She wasn't just going to this clinic for routine prenatal ultrasounds, Ethan said, pointing to a specific string of billing codes. She underwent highly complex in vitro fertilization procedures. She paid a massive premium in stolen cash to the medical director to expedite the process and keep the records completely off the primary hospital network. Orch. I scrolled down to the very bottom of the invoice, where the provider of the genetic material was listed. Malcolm's name was nowhere on the official medical documentation. The clinic had sourced the required genetic material from an anonymous, heavily screened private donor. Orch. I leaned back in my leather chair, the weight of the discovery crashing over me like a tidal wave and completely drowning out the chaotic noise outside my office. The child she was currently carrying, the child she had just used on national television as a shield against federal prosecution, the child supposedly set to inherit a multi-billion-dollar real estate empire in Atlanta. Orch. Savannah's bloodline was a complete fake. The baby wasn't Malcolm's. My office's heavy laser printer hummed to life, breaking the tense silence of the executive suite. Crisp white paper slid into the output tray 1 page at a time, each printed with lethal medical billing codes and hidden offshore financial ledgers. Orch. This was the absolute undeniable proof. Savannah had stolen $15 million from a billionaire family trust and used a fraction of it to purchase anonymous genetic material. The highly anticipated heir to Malcolm's massive real estate empire was a complete biological fraud. I gather the warm sheets of paper and slide them into a bright red, tamper-evident document bag. In high-stakes crisis PR, paper trails of financial fraud are every bit as critical as digital backups. Ethan stays at my desk, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He's kicking off an encrypted cloud backup of the entire data breach while bouncing our agency servers through a secure VPN. It'll take him another 20 minutes to finish, making sure the overseas hackers Savannah hired can't wipe our hard drives overnight. I tell him I'm going down to the underground executive garage. I need to lock this physical case file inside the biometric steel safe welded into the trunk of my car. Leaving hard copies of financial crimes on my desk simply isn't an option. I step out of the private elevator and into the chill of the subterranean parking structure. The air down here is damp and cold, heavy with the faint scent of motor oil and freezing concrete. Flickering fluorescent lights cast long, distorted shadows across empty parking stalls. My heels click loudly against the pavement, echoing in the dead silence. I'm less than 20 feet from my car when the screech of heavy tires shatters the quiet. A black, full-size SUV, with dark tinting, rounded a concrete pillar at full speed. Its high beams blast on, blinding me in a flash of harsh light. The heavy vehicle slams on the brakes, blocking my path and cutting me off completely. My pulse spikes, but I force my breathing to stay steady as I clutch the red folder tightly to my chest. The front doors of the SUV burst open, and two burly men step into the harsh light. Wearing dark tactical jackets, they move with the silent, predatory agility of expensive street mercenaries. These aren't standard corporate security guards. They're heavy hitters who work for untraceable cash and leave permanent scars. They move quickly to flank me, cutting off any retreat to the safety of the elevator bay. I hold my ground, my eyes darting between the two towering figures. Then, the rear passenger door slides open. My father, William, steps out onto the cold concrete. He adjusts the lapels of his expensive wool coat, his face set in a dark, bitter glare. My mother, Catherine, steps out right behind him, a heavy silk scarf wrapped tight against the garage chill. They look down at me with pure, unadulterated contempt. "Did you really think you were the only one who knew how to play surveillance, Caroline?" my father asks, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Did you think Savannah was stupid enough to pay a corrupt fertility doctor millions without putting a security tripwire on his medical files?" My grip tightens on the red folder. It hits me instantly. The chief medical director at the Illyrium Health Institute had tracking software on his private patient database. The second I bypassed his firewall to pull those IVF records, an alert went straight to my sister. They know exactly what I just uncovered. Catherine steps forward, her heel grinding a loose pebble into the pavement. She glances at the hired men standing over me, then turns to look me in the eye with a cruel, triumphant sneer. "We will never let you ruin this family," my mother hissed, all warmth gone from her eyes. "The baby Savannah is carrying is our ticket into a multi-billion-dollar dynasty. Do you have any idea what Malcolm will do if he finds out that child isn't his? He will tear Savannah apart. He'll go after every single cent she moved to offshore accounts. We will be left with nothing." My father points a shaking, angry finger straight at my chest. "Hand over that red folder right now," William orders. "Then you turn around, go upstairs, and permanently delete every digital file you just downloaded. Because if you breathe a single word to Malcolm about that stolen 15 million or who the real father is, these two gentlemen will be paying your husband a visit." The threat hangs heavy in the freezing air, suffocating and sharp. "Ethan is a former federal prosecutor," I say, my voice low and dangerous. "If you send these thugs after my husband, wire fraud will be the least of your problems. You'll spend the rest of your lives in federal prison." My mother bursts into laughter, a sharp, piercing sound that bounces off the concrete ceiling. Do you honestly think we care about federal laws right now, Caroline? We are fighting for survival. The Malcolm family has enough money to buy half the country. If we lose our tie to his fortune, we lose everything. We will burn your agency to the ground. We will destroy your husband. We will do whatever it takes to protect Savannah's position. George. William takes a step closer, his face twisted in desperate rage. You are completely outmatched. We have the muscle, and we have billionaire protection. You have nothing but a failing PR firm and a frozen bank account. My mother crosses her arms, her cold smile widening. Just wait until you watch the news tomorrow morning, Caroline. George. Malcolm set up a massive live press conference at a downtown hotel. Savannah is taking the stage. Right in front of the cameras, she's going to label you a disturbed extortionist sister who's harassing a pregnant woman. Catherine leans in, dropping her voice to a bitter whisper. You'll be ruined forever. Your clients will despise you. The world will view you as a monster. George. And if you try to fight back, or if you try to leak those medical records, we'll unleash these men on your family. They expect me to shake. They expect me to drop the red folder, drop to my knees, and surrender to their intimidation. They think the threat of harm and total public humiliation will finally break the daughter they cast aside 15 years ago. George. I look at the two heavy hitters blocking my way, at my father sweating in the cold garage, and at my mother desperately clinging to her web of lies. I don't drop the folder, I don't back down. I just stand in the shadows of that underground garage, look my mother straight in the eye, and give a cold, quiet smile. My smile catches my mother off guard. She expected tears, begging, or panic. George. Instead, I stand my ground in the freezing garage, holding the red folder tight against my chest. The two mercenaries shift uncomfortably. Men who operate in the shadows always have a gut instinct for when a trap is about to spring. Before my father can demand the file again, the heavy steel door to the emergency stairwell bursts open. Ethan steps out onto the concrete landing. He isn't alone. George. Walking beside my husband are 3 off-duty city police officers, working private security for my firm during high-stakes corporate disputes. Ethan holds up his phone, its screen glowing bright in the dim light. The recording timer has already passed the 3-minute mark. I think we've heard enough, Ethan says, his voice carrying across the garage. George. As a former federal prosecutor, I can tell you that cornering a witness in a dark parking structure to suppress evidence of federal crimes is a textbook RICO violation for witness tampering. I've already live-streamed this entire audio recording to my secure server. George. If anyone takes a single step toward my wife, these officers will arrest you immediately for felony witness intimidation and attempted assault. The two mercenaries back off instantly. They were paid to intimidate corporate rivals, not to engage armed officers while being recorded for a federal indictment. George. They drop their hands and take a massive step back, making it clear they want no part of this disaster. My father turns pale, his false bravado vanishing the moment his hired muscle abandons him. My mother clutches her silk scarf, her eyes darting in terror between the armed officers and the glowing screen of Ethan's phone. George. You'll regret this, Catherine hisses, her voice trembling with fear and stubborn malice. You think you're clever, Caroline, but tomorrow morning, Malcolm is holding a live press conference at a downtown hotel. Savannah will take the stage, cry for the cameras, and tell the entire country that you're a jealous, disturbed monster extorting a pregnant woman. George. Every major news network will broadcast it live. You'll never show your face in this city again. I walk past her, stepping into the protective circle formed by Ethan and the officers. I pop my trunk, press my thumb to the biometric steel safe inside, and lock the red document bag away. I'll be sure to tune in, I say, without looking back. George. We leave them in the cold, damp garage and drive straight back to our high-rise penthouse. Neither of us sleeps a wink that night. The stakes are far too high. My mother was right about one thing. A live, nationally televised press conference hosted by a billionaire real estate heir would dominate the news cycle. George. If Savannah controls the narrative for even an hour, my agency will be permanently destroyed, and the truth about her stealing $15 million and faking her child's lineage will be buried under a wave of public outrage. We transform our dining room into a digital war room. Ethan reaches out to his legal network, preparing to counter the inevitable federal injunctions, while I tap into my elite crisis PR network to execute a classified operation. Information is ammunition, and access is everything. I bypass standard media channels and dive straight into the media registration database for Malcolm's press conference. I download the contact details for every reporter, news anchor, and outlet slated to attend, compiling a massive targeted distribution list. Then, I build the ultimate digital strike payload. I digitize the offshore bank statements proving Savannah stole $15 million from the Malcolm Family Trust. I upload the forged state documents my parents used to frame me as a straw executive for a fake charity. Finally, I attach the billing codes from the Illyrium Health Institute, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that Savannah's high-profile pregnancy came from an anonymous donor. I link the entire encrypted package into a single broadcast email. With one tap of my finger, the undeniable truth will explode straight into the pocket of every reporter in the country. The sun begins to rise over the skyline, casting a cold, hard light into our penthouse. My stomach knots with heavy anxiety. The morning news shows are already teasing the upcoming press conference, with banners reading, "Billionaire heir to address cyber attack by wife's sister." Savannah's victim narrative is already taking over the morning news. Ethan walks up behind me and places his hands on my shoulders, working out the tension in my muscles. "Everything we need is ready," he says softly. "Are you ready to do this?" I close my laptop and stand up. Walking into the closet, I select my armor, a sharp, perfectly tailored charcoal suit. I apply my makeup meticulously, making sure my face shows no trace of exhaustion, fear, or defeat. I am no longer the terrified 18-year-old girl they threw out into the rain. I am the architect of their downfall. Ethan drives me to the luxury hotel in downtown. The building is surrounded by Malcolm's private security detail and a sea of media broadcast vans. The sidewalk is a chaotic blend of flashing lights and shouting reporters. Using my credentials as a senior crisis manager, I slip past the outer security checkpoints. Through a service hallway I've used a dozen times for corporate events. The guard at the side door assumes I'm part of hotel event management. I move with quiet, invisible purpose, pushing through the heavy velvet doors and slipping into the back of the grand ballroom. The space is packed wall to wall, with aggressive reporters and blinding camera lights. I blend into the deep shadows at the very back of the room, completely unnoticed by the crowd. At the front of the hall, on the brightly lit stage, the heavy curtains draw back. Malcolm steps into the blinding flashes of the press cameras. Right behind him are my father, my mother, and finally Savannah. She wears a soft white dress, holding a tissue, with one hand placed protectively over her stomach. She looks entirely prepared to destroy my life on national television. I stand in the dark, my phone unlocked in my hand, my thumb hovering directly over the send button, waiting for my sister to step up to the podium. The grand ballroom vibrates with the collective energy of 300 reporters. Heavy TV cameras form an impenetrable mechanical wall down the center aisle, while bright white strobes flash in a continuous rhythm against the gold leaf ceiling. I stand completely still in the shadows of the velvet drapery near the back exit, my charcoal suit blending into the dim lighting. Inhaling the scent of expensive hotel floral arrangements and hot broadcast gear, I wait for the execution to begin. On the stage, Malcolm approaches the clear acrylic podium. He adjusts the microphone with calm authority, and the low chatter of the press corps instantly dies down into a heavy silence. When a billionaire real estate heir calls a sudden press conference to address a cyber attack on his pregnant wife, the media pays attention. Malcolm looks out over the crowd, his face a mask of stern resolve. Orch. He speaks briefly about the sanctity of family, the importance of his business empire, and his determination to protect his estate from malicious interference. Then, with a slow, protective gesture, he steps back and invites his wife to speak. Savannah walks slowly to the podium, delivering the performance of her life. Orch. She wears a soft, remarkably conservative white maternity dress that highlights her bump. Her blonde hair is pulled back simply and elegantly. Her face is stripped of her usual heavy makeup, carefully styled to make her look pale, exhausted, and fragile. My mother and father step forward, standing a few feet behind her, with identical expressions of deep parental grief. Orch. Savannah grips the edges of the acrylic podium, her hands visibly trembling. She lets out a soft, shaky sigh into the microphone, echoing through the ballroom speakers. "Thank you all for coming," Savannah begins, her voice trembling with manufactured trauma. "As an expectant mother, my only priority right now is the safety of my unborn child." Orch. But over the last 48 hours, my family has been subjected to a cruel, terrifying campaign of criminal extortion. Cameras click furiously, capturing every calculated tear that wells up and slips down her pale cheeks. Savannah rests one hand protectively over her stomach, a move designed to draw maximum public sympathy. Orch. "The person behind this campaign isn't some random cybercriminal," she continues. "It's my own sister, Caroline. 15 years ago, she chose a dark path of addiction and rebellion, turning her back on our family. My parents used their life savings to try and save her, but she walked away. We gave her money to rebuild her life, and she squandered it. Orch. Now, seeing the stable life my husband and I have built, she has returned out of pure malice." My mother, Catherine, steps up and places a comforting hand on Savannah's shoulder, a flawless display of maternal support. My father, William, stands tall, puffing out his chest to look like a protective patriarch, even though he never was one. Orch. "Yesterday," Savannah sobs, leaning into the microphone so the national audience catches every drop of heartbreak. "Caroline sent armed men to my father's office. She demanded millions of dollars, threatening to release forged financial documents to destroy my youth charity. When we refused to pay her ransom, she launched a vicious cyber attack against our accounts. Orch. The stress from her physical threats was so severe that I had to be rushed to the emergency room. She is trying to intimidate me into losing my baby. I just want her to leave my family alone." Reporters immediately shout out questions, their voices overlapping in a frenzy. Orch. They demand to know if the FBI is involved, if I am in police custody, and if Malcolm's family is taking aggressive legal action to protect their unborn heir. Savannah raises a trembling hand to quiet the room. She wipes a tear from her cheek and scans the broad ballroom. She knows exactly what she's doing. She knows I'm in the room because my mother promised her I would watch myself be destroyed. Orch. Her eyes sweep across the crowded room, searching the deep shadows at the back. Then her eyes lock onto mine. A flash of cruel triumph glimmers in her eyes for a split second before she quickly shifts her face back into a mask of unadulterated fear. She lets out an exaggerated gasp, leaning back into my mother, and points a trembling finger straight at me. Orch. "She's here!" Savannah screams into the mic, her voice rising in fake panic. "She's standing right there in the back. Please, someone get her away from me. She's dangerous." The entire ballroom shifts in an instant. 300 heads turn as one. Heavy cameras swing around on their tripods, their red recording lights locking onto my position in the shadows. Orch. A wall of blinding white light hits me as every photographer in the room aims their flashes toward the back wall. The press surges forward like a pack of hungry wolves. Reporters push past each other, rushing down the center aisle, thrusting digital recorders and heavy microphones directly into my face. Orch. They hurl an aggressive barrage of questions about addiction, extortion, and whether I feel any remorse for attacking a pregnant woman. The noise is deafening, a wall of physical pressure meant to crush anyone caught in the center. Suddenly, The shouting is drowned out by the authoritative voices of Malcolm's private security detail. Porch. 6 burly men in black suits push through the crowd, shoving reporters aside. They form a tight, hostile semicircle around me, trapping me against the velvet drapery. They aren't there to protect me from the press. They are there to drag me out of the building and complete my public humiliation. Up on the stage, through the glaring lights and press frenzy, I can see my parents clearly. Porch. My mother is smiling openly now, completely dropping her grieving act in the thrill of the moment. My father looks down at me in absolute, unvarnished triumph. They think they've successfully backed their scapegoat into a corner. They think they've thrown me to the wolves on live television, cementing their fake narrative forever. They think I am completely ruined. Porch. I stand perfectly still, surrounded by shouting journalists and closing security guards. I don't flinch. I don't raise my hands to block the flashing cameras. I don't utter a single word of defense or try to push the microphones away. Instead, I slowly raise my phone into the air, holding it high enough for the television cameras to capture its glowing screen. I ignore the shouting reporters. Porch. I ignore the heavy security guards invading my space. I ignore my smug parents and Savannah's pathetic sobbing act at the podium. Looking past the chaotic crowd, I lock my eyes directly onto Malcolm, who still stands tall at the center of the stage. For one electric second, the billionaire real estate heir and the crisis PR consultant exchange silent, unwavering look across the grand ballroom. Porch. Without breaking eye contact with my brother-in-law, my thumb presses down hard on the screen, clicking send. My thumb lifts from the smooth glass. For less than a heartbeat, the grand ballroom remains suspended in total chaos. The burly security guards keep closing in, reaching out to grab my shoulders and haul me away. Porch. The aggressive reporters keep shouting in my face, convinced I am a monster who attacked a helpless pregnant woman. My mother and father stand on the stage, glowing with arrogant victory, as they watch my public execution. Then, the digital strike lands. It starts with a single, sharp chime from a reporter's phone in the front row. Porch. A split second later, a cascade of ringtones, buzzes, and alert sounds explodes across the room. 300 phones, tablets, and laptops receive my encrypted payload in the exact same millisecond. The sheer volume of simultaneous notifications echoes through the cavernous room like an air raid siren. Porch. All hostile energy directed at me vanishes, replaced by the predatory instinct of the national press. Reporters stop shouting. They lower their microphones, pull phones from their pockets, and stare eagerly at the sudden wave of incoming emails. The subject line I crafted is impossible to ignore. Official financial audit and protected medical records of the Savannah Trust. Porch. I specifically encoded the attached audio file to auto-preview and play the moment it's opened, long before anyone can process the massive offshore ledgers or forged state documents. My sister's arrogant, undeniable voice echoes from a reporter's phone near the center aisle. Savannah isn't crying in the recording. She's laughing. Porch. I transferred another $500,000 to the private clinic today. Savannah's recorded voice boasts, cutting through the sudden silence in the room. The medical director guaranteed he'd alter the genetic profile records on the private server. Malcolm will never know the child came from an anonymous donor. His family thinks they're untouchable, but they're completely blind. Porch. Once this baby is born, my position in the trust is permanent. We can siphon out another $20 million before the fiscal year ends. A collective shockwave ripples through the crowd, but the digital payload isn't done. Next, my mother's voice joins the recording, her tone calculating and sharp. Make sure you clean up the transaction trail. Catherine instructs in the recording. Porch. We've already taken $15 million from the holding company. If we drain Malcolm's trust funds too fast, his accountants will notice the missing liquidity. I've already sent people to the parking garage to handle your sister. Once those men intimidate her, Caroline won't dare say a word to anyone. More reporters press play on their devices. Porch. Soon, the devastating conversation plays simultaneously from dozens of speakers, creating a terrible chorus of my sister and mother exposing their ultimate betrayal in their own words. The recorded voices discuss faking DNA tests, stealing generational wealth, and hiring muscle to physically suppress a family member. The security guards surrounding me freeze in their tracks. Porch. They slowly lower their hands and take several deliberate steps back. Orderly commands crackle through their earpieces, but they realize instantly that I am not a physical threat. I am the architect of the biggest corporate and social scandal of the decade, and I just handed the smoking gun directly to the press. I simply lean back against the velvet wall and watch my masterpiece detonate. Porch. On stage, the carefully constructed illusion shatters completely. Savannah stares down at the press pool in absolute, paralyzing horror. The color drains from her face so fast, she looks physically ill. Her hands fly away from her stomach as she lunges forward, gripping the clear acrylic podium to keep from falling. Porch. That's fake, Savannah screams into the mic, her voice cracking under the weight of her collapsing lies. Don't listen to that. Caroline forged that audio with AI. It's a deepfake. She's framing me. Someone shut down the network. Shut it down now. But the journalists have already scrolled past the audio files to the hard financial evidence. Porch. They see the Cayman Islands wire transfers matching the exact dates of her clinic visits. They see the unmasked billing codes from the Illyrium Health Institute, prove she purchased anonymous donor material. They see the undeniable empirical proof of a $15 million heist and a fabricated lineage. The press surges forward, rushing the stage like a tsunami. Porch. They completely abandon the sympathetic narrative of a helpless pregnant woman. Pointing their cameras directly at Savannah, they hurl brutal, pointed questions. Is it true the child isn't your husband's? A reporter from a major financial network shouts over the din. Did you steal $15 million from the family trust to pay for illegal treatments? Porch. My father, William, takes a terrified step back, gasping for air as his face turns ash gray. The reality of impending federal arrests finally shatters his last shred of pride. He looks like a man who knows the FBI is waiting right outside the door. Porch. My mother, Catherine, tries to grab Savannah's arm to pull her off the stage, but her prized daughter is frozen in shock, clutching the podium as the press tears her reputation to shreds. Through the flashing strobes and the deafening roar of the press pool, my eyes remain locked on the center of the stage. Malcolm stands completely still amidst the chaos of his in-laws. Porch. He isn't looking at the shouting reporters, nor is he looking at the financial documents being waved in the air. He slowly reaches out and takes his microphone from the podium stand, lowering it to his side with calm, measured precision. Then, Malcolm turns to look at his crying, hysterical wife. His deep eyes are like cold ashes. His face shows no shock, no sense of betrayal, and no heartbreak. Porch. As the entire world collapses around Savannah, the billionaire real estate heir doesn't look surprised at all. Savannah reaches out with trembling hands, her knuckles white, desperately trying to grab the lapel of Malcolm's custom suit. She is crying hysterically now, abandoning the microphone to beg her husband to save her. Porch. She pleads for protection, swearing on her life that the recordings are advanced digital fabrications. Malcolm doesn't flinch. He doesn't offer a comforting embrace or whisper words of reassurance. He simply takes a deliberate step back, letting Savannah's hands catch empty air. He looks at the woman he married 5 years ago as if she were a complete stranger. Porch. Then, Malcolm does something that turns my mother's blood to ice. He looks right past his sobbing wife, past the frantic crowd of reporters, and locks his gaze directly onto me, standing in the deep shadows near the exit. Slowly and deliberately, the billionaire real estate heir nods his head toward me in a crisp, respectful gesture. Savannah catches the movement. Porch. She snaps her head around, her tear-streaked face twisting in confusion as she follows her husband's gaze straight to me. My mother and father see the silent exchange, too. The arrogant victory that lit up their faces moments ago instantly evaporates, replaced by a sudden suffocating terror. They finally begin to realize that in this script, they were never the predators. They were the prey. The chaotic sequence of the last 48 hours wasn't a sudden disaster. It was a meticulously choreographed trap, and I was the architect who designed it. The real story didn't start at the charity gala 2 nights ago. It started 6 months ago in a high-security executive boardroom at the top of a downtown skyscraper. 6 months ago, the patriarch of the Atlanta real estate empire, Malcolm's father, flew into the city under an alias. Having spent decades building a multi-billion-dollar dynasty, a man of his level has a cold instinct for spotting financial parasites. He had noticed a subtle, unexplainable bleed of funds from a secondary family trust. The discrepancies were incredibly complex, hidden under layers of corporate red tape, but Savannah's name always hovered at the edges of the bleeding accounts. The patriarch couldn't accuse his daughter-in-law directly without risking a catastrophic, highly public war within the family. He needed undeniable proof. He needed someone who could operate in complete secrecy, someone who knew how to navigate elite corporate scandals, and above all, someone who understood how Savannah's manipulative mind worked. He didn't hire ordinary private investigators. He hired my crisis PR firm. Half a year ago, I sat in that secure boardroom across from Malcolm and his powerful father. Malcolm was devastated by the initial financial findings, but his loyalty to his family legacy ultimately outweighed the illusion of his marriage. I told them that confronting Savannah directly would only result in dramatic tears and gaslighting. Narcissists like my sister and parents never confess when accused. They only expose themselves when they believe they have absolute, untouchable power. To catch them, we had to starve them of oxygen, back them into a corner, and hand them a loaded gun. Every terrible event over the last 2 days was a calculated move in our joint sting operation. The confrontation at the charity gala was an opening play. When Malcolm stormed into the ballroom with security, demanding I turn over my agency, it was pure theater. We needed Savannah and my parents to believe they had successfully weaponized a billionaire against me. We needed them to feel completely invincible. When my commercial accounts were frozen at 8 this morning, the panic in my office was real because my staff didn't know the truth. But Ethan and I did. Days before filing the injunctions, Ethan used his contacts as a former federal prosecutor to quietly route my agency's actual working capital into an untouchable federal escrow account. The clients who canceled their contracts were actually shell companies managed by Malcolm's team. The financial siege was an illusion designed to lower my family's guard completely. It worked perfectly. Believing I was ruined and desperate, my father strutted into my office to demand control of my company. Believing I had no way to fight back, my parents ambushed me with mercenaries in the cold garage. Drunk on their supposed victory, they discussed their crimes over recorded lines, completely unaware that Ethan and off-duty officers were standing a few feet away, gathering the final pieces of audio evidence needed for federal indictments. Back in the grand ballroom, the press pool vibrates with adrenaline. Journalists rapidly cross-reference the offshore bank ledgers on their phones with the drama unfolding on stage. Malcolm slowly raises the microphone back to his lips, and the room falls instantly silent once more. For the past 6 months, Malcolm's deep voice echoes through the hall. My family trust has been cooperating with an independent private investigation into severe financial irregularities. Today, the results of that investigation are public. Effective immediately, I am filing for a complete annulment of my marriage, and my legal team is handing all gathered evidence of embezzlement directly over to federal authorities. Savannah lets out a blood-curdling scream of agony. She grabs the microphone stand, her knuckles white. "You can't do this to me, Malcolm," Savannah shrieks, dropping every shred of composure. She points a trembling, frantic finger at her stomach. I am your wife. I am carrying your child. You're throwing away your own blood over a misunderstanding. I did all of this for us. Malcolm looks down at the woman who spent 5 years treating my life as collateral damage, showing her not an ounce of mercy. His voice is cold and hard as concrete. Orch. We both know that child doesn't carry a single drop of my blood, Savannah. Malcolm's words cut through the heavy air of the ballroom. The medical invoices from the Illyrium Health Institute are right there in the digital package distributed to the press. You bought anonymous donor material just to secure your place in my estate. You're a fraud, and your time is officially up. Orch. My mother collapses onto the stage, her knees slamming hard against the polished hardwood floor as the absolute reality of their ruin finally sets in. My father staggers back, his face gray with terror, his eyes darting frantically toward the side exit. But it's far too late to run. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the ballroom slam open against the walls with a loud bang. Orch. The sea of shouting reporters and flashing cameras parts instantly like the Red Sea. Marching down the center aisle isn't another squad of private corporate security guards. It's a highly coordinated strike team of uniformed police officers, led by 2 strict federal investigators in tactical jackets. Orch. The glaring TV lights catch the cold glint of heavy steel handcuffs hanging from the lead detective's belt. The press erupts into total madness. A deafening, overlapping roar of questions explodes from the media pool as cameras flash wildly, capturing the unprecedented spectacle of law enforcement raiding a billionaire's live press conference. Orch. Upstairs, Ethan and I had just finished reviewing our final contract with Malcolm's Family Trust. We were getting ready to head out for a late celebratory dinner. Stepping into the private elevator, the polished doors slid shut, carrying us smoothly down to the ground level. Wears a tailored cashmere coat, I was completely insulated from the freezing weather outside. Orch. Ethan held my hand, our shared silence speaking louder than words, reflecting the absolute peace we had finally achieved. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the main lobby. The doors opened to reveal a wide expanse of imported marble and warm ambient lighting. But the serene atmosphere was instantly broken. Through the thick glass walls of the private lobby, I saw them. Orch. My mother and father were pressed tightly against the heavy glass doors. Their faces were pale and gaunt, completely stripped of the arrogance and superiority they had used against me my whole life. Water dripped from Catherine's matted hair, ruining the remnants of her expensive salon styling. William's custom wool suit hung on his frame like a heavy, soaked rag. They looked utterly miserable. Orch. The moment they saw me step out of the elevator, their eyes widened in frantic, wild desperation. They began pounding their wet palms against the reinforced glass. As I watched the morning sun reflect off the glass skyscrapers of the city, I know I will never need to look back. Orch. The greatest lesson I learned from this entire painful ordeal is that true power isn't about fighting your toxic family head-on. It's about stepping back and letting their own arrogant egos destroy them. For 15 years, I thought surviving their cruelty was my greatest victory. I was wrong. Orch. The moment you stop playing the victim and refuse to participate in their manipulative games, their entire house of cards collapses under its own weight. You have no obligation to save people who willingly jump off a cliff. Feel free to share your own experiences with toxic relatives in the comments below.